what deserves to have its own cinematic universe. When I was a kid, I just assumed all 80s action shows were in the same reality. They were all kinda filmed in Hollywood backlots and they all had the same look. So A-Team, Airwolf, Chips, Knight Rider, all existing in LA, and maybe we just never saw the interaction on screen. And somewhere across the ocean doing his own thing ... Magnum Pie. I was watching a short video on YouTube and I found out that the guy that created the show also created The Greatest American Hero. Man, that would have been an amazing crossover. Ralph needs to find the A-Team because they have an old work buddy of theirs, Thomas Magnum, that's in serious danger. Meanwhile, Thomas Magnum has been investigating an organization called Knight Industries. An old project of theirs named Goliath, this one responsible for a string of bank robberies. Little does he know that the evil Michael Knight has been using alien technology to soup up the Goliath truck. Edit: I found the video on YouTube, not an ATM. The only one I've seen is that Mummy movie from 2017, and it was pretty weird. Like they wanted to turn the Monsters universe into an Avengers-type story, which is the type of thing that the Asylum, creators of Sharknado, would do as a joke. I also found myself rooting for the Mummy throughout that entire movie because Aminat was the most interesting and badass character in the whole thing. The good guys were the bad guys for me almost the whole way through. Even though one of my biggest criticisms of the MCU is how they've managed to make a lot of people believe the only way an interconnected media universe can work is through individual solo movies building up to a big event over the course of 5-6 years. A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen series in the MCU style would rock. Apologies to Alan Moore for bringing this idea up. TBF, DC sort of tried this. Their first strategy was to do a 5-part Man of Steel series, sort of like a Nolan trilogy, but with more movies, because they believed the Avengers, 2012, was probably a one-off. When they saw Marvel was making bank with crossover stuff, DC thought we'll just try team-up movies with occasional solo films, like Suicide Squad, Justice League Dark, etc., and only rarely doing an Aquaman or Batman film. Then Suicide Squad did well commercially and no one liked it, so DC thought, okay, let's literally just do whatever solo movies we think will work. So, not just MCU's fault. So did some damage there too. https://www.somanews.com/World of Warcraft 2 movie is finally here or not / I'm unsure of how legitimate this source is, but supposedly there may be a Warcraft 2 for us yet. I have been following this since Warcraft came out because I loved it so much. I know that the director of the first one isn't interested in pursuing it. Something about a leak of information regarding the second one. I think maybe someone else will take up the mantle. I think a Warcraft movie directed by Peter Jackson might be pretty sweet. It has to be something diverse in its styles but consistent enough to feel like not just a spin-off. Comic books are perfect because you got so many types of characters and worlds, but something like Hobbs and Shaw just felt like more Fast and Furious with less characters. My pick is Universal should have actually stuck with the Dark Universe idea. I could have hit that sweet spot of diverse ideas that also make sense to cross over with each other. Sure, the new Mummy sucked, but if they stuck with it refined, it could have been a good series. Sliders. It's been 21 years since the show ended. The show started out with the technology to move randomly between dimensions, and by the end of the series the main characters had figured out how to slide at will, plus entire ships were able to travel across dimensions. The last episode ended with the hook for the upcoming final showdown in an interdimensional war. So now what? It's a post-war universe where people now are aware of the existence of other worlds. They could easily follow a core group of characters who have in-universe reasons for solo storylines. He's in another dimension, and can team up for big features or cameo in each other's films. There can be multiple stories spreading across several dimensions, all affecting each other simultaneously. Just have Rembrandt cameo in the first movie and continue from there. That's my choice as well. You start off with 4 movies: Mort, Ward Sisters, Guards, and Moving Pictures. If all goes well, you now have 3 main series running parallel: Death/Susan, The Witches, and The Watch, plus an extra spot for standalone stories. If all doesn't go well, at least you've done enough world building to continue 1 or 2 of those main series by themselves. If I remember rightly, the director of the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies originally was working on a BioShock movie, but apparently it never got past pre-production, because when he was hoping to rely on a lot of practical effects instead of CGI after getting a glimpse of the games, but they quickly figured out that the movie was gonna carry a very hefty price tag, so they shelved it. This is tough. Where do we have 4 or 5 individual characters that could each support a solo movie with limited crossover and then have the group pulled together every 3 or 5 years? DC apparently can't make a movie to save its life. Star Wars bungled the torch pass just so badly it'll probably be 10 years before we see them attempt it again. Well, they're making Foundation, so I guess you have your Asimovers there. The robot novels are in the same universe. We could do with more sci-fi classic verses. A lot of Alan Dean Foster's Commonwealth, that gets you Prism, Iceriger, Flanks and a bunch of others. Or Peter F. Hamilton's Commonwealth Void Dreams series would be good. Pierce Brown's Red Rising series, or like I call it, mythological pantheon Game of Thrones in space. Ian M. Banks's Culture series. Some of the psychopath ship minds would make great cameos for some big names. Honestly, if SCP ever gets a series made, it should be its own canon from the wiki stuff. Too many entries conflict with each other anyway, so the best way to go forward with it is to change up the details for the big, small screen. Not sure if it would totally get the clear from the license, but it's worth a shot. Pluto. It streamlines a lot of things into one timeline. Off the top of my head, multiple perspectives on the same Wii battle has happened a couple times. Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, Dear Clint Eastwood, portray the Japanese and American sides of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Tora showed both the Japanese and American sides of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, with each side's segments directed by someone from that country. Barney, Teletubbies, Dragon Tales, Arthur, Caillou, the Berenstain Bears, Sagwa the Chinese Siamese Cat, and Thomas and Friends. They have their origin stories, and then the PBS Sleek where they have to fight JJ the Jet Plane and his friends to bring back the heart of the universe, Mr. Rogers. 2001 AD. The comic series that Judge Dredd came from. Dredd is fantastic, but he's just the tip of the iceberg. The whole setting is nuts. That perfect blend of goofy over-the-top satire presented with a completely straight face. That era of British sci-fi had such a wonderful trend of never winking at the audience. Stuff like Dredd and early Warhammer 40k was satire through and through, but it played it completely straight even though it was so goofy, which makes it 10 times funnier. It would have to be directed by Paul Verhoeven though, so they need to hurry up and get started before he gets too old. Discworld. There have been a few movie adaptations that were pretty decent. I've heard that the current Watch TV show is pretty bad though, that they changed too many things. There's going to be an animated movie of The Amazing Morris and I hope it's good, but I'm worried they'll take all the darker parts out and it will just be a straight-up comedy. This worry is based entirely on the art style of the poster and could be all for nothing. They need to make epic cinematic universe surrounding all the epic folk rockers in the 60s 70s, Dylan, Beatles, Hendrix, Young, Clapton, Joni Mitchell, Gordon Lightfoot, the band. All these greats have amazing solo stories and also circle each other a lot and would make for a great set of movies with interconnected actors and whatnot. Valiant Comics. Bloodshot with Van Diesel last year was trash. but the comics from the 2012 reboot are amazing and ideally set up to transfer to live action. It's the third biggest comic universe behind Marvel and DC. The characters all intertwine really well and have great team-ups and such. There is a great mix of funny characters, Quantum and Woody, Archer and Armstrong, and space aliens, X-O Manowar, ancient characters, Eternal Warrior, future characters, Raw-E, time travel, Ever, secret agent type characters, Ninjak, mystical character, Shadowman and Dr. Mirage, and really down-to-earth characters, Harbinger, Bloodshot, that you can relate to. It's a really well-balanced universe. Halo and Destiny for sure. Halo has a few things like Forward Unto Dawn and the one with Locke, but they just never had the same feel as some of their trailers and games. Halo still has some of the best trailers to date for any game. Destiny has a literal fuckton of lore that could be pulled at any point in time for stories. Their live-action trailers always made me believe they could successfully make a show or movie. There's a ton of untapped potential with Destiny still, and I believe movies or show would work immensely well if done right. Nothing. Cinematic universes are often shitstorms. Take the MCU for example. If you watch any one of the movies, without seeing the others, you're missing context, inside jokes with characters and sometimes even whole characters themselves. Sure, make sequels and trilogies and series, but when you start making stupidly large and entangled universes, you aren't really making entertainment for the sake of entertainment. The next Marvel movies aren't going to make any sense unless you watch the TV shows on Disney+. It's all a capitalist trap. Marvel Comics was its own full-blown universe before movies became a thing. It makes less sense having characters from the same universe behaving as though they are the only ones in it when a large portion of their audience know otherwise. For what it's worth, the MCU did a great job segmenting its movies that each film, even within the trilogies, is able to function well as a standalone movie. Sure, you will miss out on some inside jokes or characters, but it will not affect your movie experience. I am fine with the way the MCU has turned out. They created an immersive universe that we can choose to be a part of, and if we don't, that's fine too. But Merit, to your point, all that was possible because they were the first of their kind. Now in subsequent franchises and even MCU's own new phases moving forward, capitalism might rear its head and spoil what is essentially a revolutionary mode of storytelling, but let's hope it doesn't get ruined before it got started. I agree. I can't pinpoint what made the MCU, to date, work. It is likely a multitude of things: timing, brand recognition, a methodical build of the universe. But I get the feeling as the superhero film genre peters out, the entanglement of stories might become a burden to some people. Endgame was a definitive end of that era, but the recent films and shows, don't know about Black Widow as that is coming out in literally 20 minutes. Are the most confusing points in which to jump into the universe, so I think that will just further downfall of the trend. Hopefully I'm wrong, as I do enjoy these films. The people who are responsible for one of the most successful brands in movie history somehow overlook being able to watch a movie without watching a show. The movies will make sense on their own. They aren't going to alienate the majority of the audience. Also grow up. You can't just call everything that makes money capitalist. They developed a model that people obviously like. It's not a trap. It's sliced bread, a capitalist trap. Our TV shows capitalist traps. They're products that people enjoy. Every anime ever, yes, hentai, should he combine into one singular universe. It would be a battle of the ages. Characters from Naruto and Demon Slayer battling it out while many other different animes clash as well. But it's not all chaos, as the more mundane and chill animes like Toradora and Chunibyo are just living their lives out in high school, seeing how characters from different universes meshed in a more social environment. Also can't forget the enormous groupies. But that's aside the point. This would be cool as hell, but rather impossible to make a movie out of. Maybe a book? Probably totally unknown, but Dan Bishop's Others series, a world where humans aren't the dominant species, have never been, and have to arrange themselves with powerful animalistic shapeshifters, elementals and worse. The first 5 books alone could keep his studio happily occupied, and the possibility of spin-offs are endless. Just stay away from the Lake Silence spin-off books. They are just fan service. The Star Wars Expanded Universe, not the trash Disney pumped out for a cash grab. There were so many great books that should have been movies too, even if they had to recast the original trio. I'll add Larry Niven's known space-time blend would be awesome too. The Mangxen Wars would be crazy, and it would be amazing if someone could do the Ring world justice on the big screen. The TV show The Pretender, child genius, named Jared, was experimented on. Jared is smart enough to seamlessly become a member of any profession he wants to enter: doctor, plumber, lawyer. As an adult, he runs away to find his bio family. The center, think tank, sends operatives to bring him back. There were 2 TV movies and a series of books to try to reboot the series. Things were just getting interesting in season 4 when it was cancelled. I always thought The Matrix would have been a good option. You have Neo's story, sure, but The Matrix was this giant encompassing system that involved billions of people. There are bound to be millions of interesting stories involving The Matrix. I loved the Animatrix series, wish we could have gotten more of that. Dating myself a bit here, but The World of Darkness. One of the great things White Wolf Games did with that series was have an evolving meta-narrative. As it went through the years of publications, there were central characters, themes and threats that were shared across the individual settings: werewolf, vampire, mage, wraith, etc. I think it would be interesting to have a connected universe made up of films focusing on how each one of these groups faces a global threat like an impending supernatural apocalypse without having to necessarily deal with a big Avengers-style team-up. Disney's most iconic franchises. It's actually bizarre that they haven't taken their live-action Lion King movie or The Jungle Book and somehow caused them to cross paths, but it would make a lot of sense for them to set the live-action Disney princess movies in the same universe. The show Once Upon a Time basically did it, but an Avengers movie of Disney princesses feels extremely obvious. Portal, Half-Life. There are so many different movies and limited series they could make from that universe. Aside from the main stories in the games, there's a ton of stories that could be derived from existing lore. And to keep things feeling fresh, you have tons of different time periods to pull from. Imagine a show following Cave Johnson in the early days of Aperture, or a lighthearted sitcom following a bunch of incompetent Aperture scientists leading up to GLaDOS coming online. Saints, Myths and Legends. BBC were doing a pretty good job in putting these on screen, but unfortunately those kind of shows don't seem to get watched in the way they used to. I think it would be really cool to see a massive universe with all of them together to see how the different characters from various stories would interact with one another. I'm kind of unsure if I'd actually want this, but the SCP Foundation. It's one of my favorite fictional properties of all time, but I really do not think Hollywood could do it justice. However, with the advent of online streaming and whatnot, it's becoming more economically incentivized to produce genuinely creative TV and film, which would mean it'd be possible for the Foundation to be done justice. There are licensing issues with how the SCP universe is licensed under Creative Commons, but that's not insurmountable. Films in X company's SCP universe could be given a specific name, and while the stories and characters can be reused, the specific branding and interpretation cannot, similar to how fairy tales and mythology are treated today. The SCP Foundation has some of the most creative stories and monsters in all of fiction. The things I'd really want to see put to film are existential SCPs, such as SCP-055, or even the Pattern Screamers. Hear me out. But Mortal Kombat could have had its own cinematic universe. The early games in particularly actually have a pretty extensive lore that would allow a movie format to work quite well if there were competent writers in charge who didn't just throw in characters like Nitara who were completely neutral in her original appearance just so they could be fatality fodder. There could easily be a movie on the Idanian conflict including Shao's usurpation of Onaga, Sub-Zero and Scorpion's backstory, first and second tournament, third tournament, Shinnok's invasion of Earth realm with the universe ending on Armageddon. The foundation is there if they were to add a bit more spice, but with how the story has kinda soured after MK11 and the recent movie being a bit of a dud story-wise, I think the potential for an MK cinematic universe is kinda tough. All the lore for the original MKs was overall really well done given the medium. It's a bit of a shame that properly exploring the lore might not involve the blood and guts people want to see when they hear MK.